endpoint of the present work, the things which are not derived from other things are considered under the aspect of sense percepts. They are tangibles or intangibles. Element is now substituted for the collective term used above, namely, great phenomena or beings. Mahabhutani, et sec. Both terms occur together in I. The latter term may be used to denote great or wondrous derivatives of the four elements. Great either physically or ethically. As when the ocean and its great creatures serve to illustrate the Dhamma and those wondrous phenomena, the human beings who by way of it are seeking or have attained nirvana. Dhatu, on the other hand, as the Sai, with unflagging mindfulness once more points out, indicates absence of substratum or soul. ASL. On the essential characters of the four elements, see below. Also the following note. The first two and last of these four pairs are so many aspects or modes of the earth element, and are paraphrased respectively as rigid and non-rigid, polished and jagged, weighty and non-weighty. These correspond almost exactly to our modern view of the modes of resistance, i.e. of active touch, or of skin sensibility with a coefficient of muscular sense. The Buddhist view lacks, as all but recent psychology has lacked, insight into the presence of the muscular factor. On the other hand, it is logically more symmetrical in giving lightness where Dr. Bain, e.g. gives pressure, another positive. Pleasant contact is defined as a tangible which is desired on account of pleasant feeling. The opposite, in the case of painful contact. Each of the three elements furnishes instances of either. In connection with solidity there is the pleasant contact felt when a soft palmed attendant is doing massage to one's feet, and the opposite when his hands are hard. Iram caloric, or the flame element, we may get the pleasure of a warming pan in winter, or the reverse, if it is applied in summer. From the aerial element, we may get the pleasure of fanning in summer, or the discomfort of it in winter. ASL. The Sai here discusses a point of attention in sense perception which is interesting as adumbrating modern European theories respecting consciousness and subconsciousness. In a concrete object of sense, the three modes of the tangible, i.e. the three elements, may all of them be present. Now do they all come at one stroke into the field of consciousness? They do. Thus come, do they impinge on the body sense? They do. When it has thus made them an object, does cognition of body arise at one blow? It does not. Why? Thus, mental objects are made either by deliberate sensing or by intrusion. The latter term, asadu, is more literally extrusion, or prominence, but either word shows that involuntary, as contrasted with voluntary attention is meant. Now when one is deliberately testing the hardness or softness of a ball of boiled rice by pressure, heat, and vapor are present, but it is the solid to which one gives attention. If hot water be tested by the hand, though there is solid and vaporous, it is heat that occupies the attention. If one lets the breeze blow on the body at the window in hot weather, solid and heat are present, but it is the aerial element that is attended to. Or take involuntary impressions. If you stumble, or knock your head against a tree, or bite on a pebble, heat and wind are present, but the intrusive object is solid matter. So analogously for walking on something hot, or being deafened by a hurricane. The three elements are not apprehended as such at the same instant. And with regard to the extended surface of the body sentience, cognition of body arises only in that spot where the sentient surface is impinged upon, e.g. when a shoulder wound is bathed with a quill, the kaya pasado of the shoulder is impinged upon, or intensified, and there cognition arises. And where the pasado is most powerfully impressed, there cognition arises first. Buddhaghosa goes on. With reference to the senses generally. To give a psychological account of the passing from one group of sensations or object of thought to another in terms not far removed from what would now be used to describe the movement of attention. We pass from one object to another. From deliberate inclination, or from a sensation of preponderating impressiveness, e.g. from saluting a shrine, a believer forms the intention of entering to do homage to a statue and contemplate the carvings and paintings. While contemplating some vast tope, a man is struck by the sound of music, and is then affected by flowers and incense brought near. Literally, oil. C.F. The description with that of akazadatu. This is the aspect of the moist or liquid element in an object compact of several elements. The one essential mark of apodatu is pagaranam, flowing. C. But cohesiveness of form means the cohering condition of some concrete in which there is superfluity of solid. For it is by the cohesive force of the fluid element that lumps of iron or whatnot are made rigid. Similarly in the case of stones, mountains, palms, tusks, horns, etc. Hence Buddhaghosa passes on to discuss the mutually related spheres of the elements and their apparent approximations to each other, as in viscous things, e.g. or congealed liquid, or boiling water. Corrupt MSS. However, render parts of the disquisition hard to follow. His conclusion is that whereas the elements may vary in their condition as phenomena, their essential mark never alters, however latent it may be. And he quotes a yet unedited sutta, but which is repeated in I. That it is easier for the four elements to change their essential character, than for the seeker of nirvana to alter his high estate. Here follow the remaining pairs of correlated terms, making up the categories of form under the dual aspect. Literally, which has been grasped at or laid hold of. This and the cognate terms are discussed under the group on grasping, et.sec. It is disappointing to find that, with the exception of two items in the list of things grasped at, or come into being through the action of karma, the Psi does not discuss the inclusion of any. One would have liked to hear, e.g. why, of all sense objects, sounds alone are not the issue of grasping. Cf. The heresy concerning sound as result of karma, k.v. and why the elements of space and of fluidity may and may not be the issue of grasping, or what they have to do with it in any way. Concerning the two items above mentioned, how is it, asks the Psi, that decay and impermanence are classed with respect to what is due, and what is not due to the performance of karma? They are classed with what is not the issue of grasping. That which has sprung from conditions other than karma is included under not due to the performance of karma. And as these two forms arise neither from karma, nor from form-producing conditions other than karma, they are therefore not classified with reference to karma. How they are acquired will become evident later. For rupasantati, read rupasasantati. The privative prefix to the first half of the stvandva compound does not apply to the latter half. All form is yupadaniyam, c, and cf. Dh. S. Hence to get, as we do, a positive answer would, if yupadaniyam were to be taken negatively, be a very patent infringement of the law of contradiction. The distributed negative is given by anupadananupadaneeyam as in I have elided sadayatanam, and, on the next line, inserted apadadu, as consistent with. The answer in recurs with its elided passage very often, but it is not easy to point out the foregoing answer of which it is an abbreviation. 4. Include visible form, which is absurd. And they do not include sound, which is invisible. I suggest that is referred to, with the implication that the sphere of visible form must be omitted. All the other terms in, if understood as strictly abstract sensibility or sensation, or as abstract ideas, are inaccessible to sight. Even in Kabalinkaro Aharo, it is only the vathu, or embodiment of the concept of nutriment, that is visible. And similarly, whereas one's bodily gestures are visible, the intimation given is a matter of inference, a mental construction. Both terms have been applied in the detailed theory of sense given in et.sec. Keeping to as the norm for these abbreviated replies, we may assume that these two divide out that answer between them. Impact and reaction, as here understood, belong exclusively to the sphere of sensation. The term patio has an emotional and moral significance elsewhere in this work, and means repulsion, repugnance. C. Would seem to be divided also and differently by the Indriyam sections. What is na Indriyarn? Not having I are thus the 5 kinds of sense objects: intimation, space, the 3 modes of form, and the course of the evolving rebirth of form as represented in abstract idea. This pair of relatives coincides with the first pair of attributes taken inversely. Forms underived and derived. See above. The abbreviated answer concerning the other relative will presumably be the entire list given in, with the exception of the 2 modes of intimation. C.F. Below, and above, note. Here, after being silent over the last 10 questions, the Psi resumes its parable, without, however, throwing much light on these to us obscure distinctions. This and the next 2 pairs of questions and answers refer to form of some kind as brought into relation with an intelligent agent. And the purest instance of this is those groups of phenomena which are brought into play when the agent is expressing himself. The expression or intimation itself, it says, does not spring directly from thought. But it is said nevertheless to have its source in thought because those phenomena on which the intimation depends are immediately prompted by thought. Just as we say that old age and death are impermanence. While there is thought, there is also expression of thought. But the concomitance stated in is not to be understood like that arising between thought and feeling and other mental processes. He is probably referring to the mental complex indicated above in and the like. See below. It will already have been noted that Ajhadakam does not run on all fours with our modern psychological term subjective, or that which belongs to the conscious experience of the individual. It connotes anything belonging to an individual organism, physical or mental. Hence, too, the word self must here be understood in no narrow metaphysical, or even psychological sense, but as equivalent to the concrete person or adabhavo. It is used in the sense of all but the last of the 4 constituents into which Professor W. James divides the self, viz. The material self, body, clothes, family, home, property. The Buddhist would only admit the first item, I fancy. The social self, and the spiritual self. Only the 4th constituent, the pure ego, was rejected by Buddhism, as it was, 22 centuries later, by Hume. Cf. However, the apparently more subjective use in and I have felt equal reluctance to foist the modern counterpart objective onto Bairam or Bayada. Read in full, this should coincide with the latter part of, beginning at the spheres of visible form. The Psi. Paraphrasing Olarikam by Thulam, explains that this has reference to the material embodiment of sense objects and to the fact of sensuous impact, Sukh Humam connoting the contrary. Under the latter class we have, according to my assumption, the indriyas of sex and vitality, intimation, space, the modes of form and the nutritive principle in food. The force of this effort at dichotomy is, to the modern Western mind, curious and not obvious. It is suggestive of tradition earlier than the date of the compiling of the Abhidhamma. As early as the earlier Upanishads, of a time when there was no definite antithesis between material and immaterial, extended and unextended. We have seen that the senses, though invisible, were conceived as species of form, nay, that the later Psi preserved the tradition of their shape and size. And I incline to think that just as in the older Upanishads, soul was a shadowy, impalpable, but physical double of the physical body. And just as when an early Greek philosopher speaks of to be, he does not mean being, but body, so the items in the list divided out in these 2 answers are all physical forms, whether patent, impressive, and pervading, or latent, fine and mysterious. Dur, the Psi explains, refers to that which on account of its being difficult to apprehend or discriminate cannot be discerned by way of the sensuous impact, whether it be literally far or near at hand. Conversely, S and tike refers to things which are patent to sense, even though they may be distant. The content of each division agrees with that of the preceding division. And we see that, whereas the field of sense perception is pronounced to be a relatively patent, as well as gross concern, the essence of sex, vitality, etc., down to the nutritive principle in food, is found to be as obscure, latent, or relatively inaccessible, as it was subtle or minute. ASL. From to the commentator lapses into silence, dismissing the reader with the remark that in the exposition on spheres, etc., the method of treatment is more detailed than it was above, and, further, that the category of triplets is easy to understand. To enable the reader to gather with more ease the drift of this part of the catechising, I have inserted a few headings to indicate whenever there is a change in the aspect under which form is considered. Thus we have form considered under the aspect of the basis in the subjective procedure of coming tak no, of the object so apprehended, and so forth. In all the answers, where lacunae occur, except where otherwise specified, the formula appears to be the answer of, with one or more terms omitted, and with the occasional insertion of the sphere of the tangible, according to the sense required by each specific process of dichotomy. By referring to the standard answer, it will be seen that the negatives in the present answer include visible forms, or the objects of the sense of vision. Now, vathu means seat, embodiment, or what we might call physical basis. However, then, the process of sense stimulation was ultimately conceived, the effective result was held to take place in the sense organ. The sense object was defined as the aramanum of the contact. C. No hiatus appears in either the English or Siamese edition of the text between rupam and kakavinanasa, but by the context the answer is, of course, understood to deal in turn with all four mental processes stated in the question. As usual, only the last term gets an explicit answer. All four processes must also be understood in the lacuna in and in. Jivaya Samphasasa has dropped out of the printed text. Here, of course, understand the spheres of hearing, smell, and taste, and in the three following lacunae the corresponding forms of contact. Proceed similarly in the next two answers. I.e. as in, omitting only the sphere of visible forms, and inserting, presumably, the sphere of the tangible. The negative particle must be supplied in the printed text. The lacunae in this and following sentences must be filled up analogously with those in the preceding group. Thus, in this question, the three other mental processes named in the preceding question are to be understood. The answer will be identical with that in, excluding only the sphere of visible forms, but inserting the sphere of the tangible. And so on. I.e. Repeat. The replies given here and to the four questions condensed in are apparently intended to be those set out in sets of four expounding the current theory of sense reaction. Similarly, for the replies to the questions on sense taken objectively, see. The contradictories seem to be described in all four answers. By a repetition of, with the omission in each case of the specific item named in the question on the corresponding positive term, and, presumably, with the insertion of the sphere of the tangible. In the printed text read rupam phadabayatanam. The answer is, of course, the last of the four several replies, the three first being understood. Here supply the answer in, omitting the first term, and inserting the sphere of the tangible. Here, of course, supply the spheres of the other three senses. For the full formula, see. I.e. answer as in, omitting the first item, and inserting the sphere of the tangible. C. Is inadvertently omitted in the printed text. A, and are presumably identical with the successive omission of the term excluded by each question, and with the insertion always of the sphere of the tangible. Again, in these two negative categories, is presumably followed with corresponding omissions and insertion. Cp. Note.cf with